Hi, Amy. Hi, Cece. Good to see you.
All right, welcome everyone. I've got 2:30 Eastern and it looks like we've got a good number of people in here already, so I'm going to kick us off. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this session. My name is Anita Hall and I'll be moderating this session. I'm really happy to welcome Amanda Albert from St. Louis Community College, Rebecca Hyde from St. Louis University, Jamie Emery from Washington University in St. Louis, and Sarah Fancher from Elsevier. They are going to be, and there's their specific titles as well.
There we are.
They will be presenting Change is Hard When the System Rewards the Privileged, Inclusive Interviewing as a Feminist Practice. So before we get started, let's go over a few logistical items. This session is being recorded. Captions are available during this session by clicking on the live CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Thank you to Javier Saavedra for providing these. Please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to do that anonymously if you'd like. There will be 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the presentation. And then you can use the chat for general comments or technical issues. Alyssa Brissett will be monitoring the chat for any questions and comments. And Alyssa will also be adding some links to the chat, seeing those already, I think, ones for collaborative resource sharing. So if you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in Calm's Resources Zotero or in the chat. And one of our volunteers will drop this information into the chat. We'll also be sharing the Calm conference code of conduct in there. And I think that's all of our logistics. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our presenters.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to take a moment again to reintroduce us as panelists and also to express some gratitude before starting. Thank you so much to Anita for monitoring the chat, and to Alyssa, and to, I think Heather was our Code of Conduct representative. Thank you all for being here today and helping us out. Thank you to Calm for providing us the opportunity to share our work. And finally, thank you to all of you for showing up and choosing our session. We are super excited to have you here. So welcome to Change is Hard. We are hopefully going to make it a little bit easier for you today. So this presentation is born out of a forthcoming book chapter that encapsulates the theoretical underpinnings and practical applications of virtual interviews as an inclusive practice. Today, we will discuss why we believe virtual interviews are universally inclusive. We will describe theories that underlie our work. Then we will highlight strategies to help you form a practice of inclusive interviewing. We will also have a short activity to help you identify ways to make your interviewing practices more inclusive, regardless of modality. And then, of course, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So again, if you have questions about logistics of the activities, please don't hesitate to use the chat. We also really encourage you to use the chat to communicate with each other, to share your ideas and resources, to make connections with each other. To continue the conversation even after we've ended here today. And then again, we've allotted time at the end for Q&A, so be sure to use the Q&A and Anita and others will help us wrangle your queries. So by the end of this session, you will be able to recognize the benefits of virtual interviewing, identify the principles of inclusive interviewing informed by intersectional feminist ethics of care, and prioritize ways in which you can move your institution to more inclusive interviewing. Now, as a group, the four of us have long lamented issues within academic library hiring practices, particularly interviews. Many of us on this webinar might be a little familiar with the traditional interview process. You might have experienced an exhausting 1 or 2 day long gauntlet of travel, endless meetings with a variety of stakeholders, a job talk, or for those of us with a background in reference and instruction, the dreaded teaching prompt, and sharing meals or making small talk with people you have just met. Being quote unquote on during the entire interview, while also having to deal with physical and mental challenges such as fatigue and brain fog from travel or lack of sleep due to nerves, aches and pains from chronic illness, social masking, in my experience, finding time to pump and store breast milk, all of that leaves candidates physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually drained. However, we have found a lot of these negative effects of interviewing were ameliorated when we participated in virtual interviews, either on search committees or being the person being interviewed. We realized there were things about the virtual interview process that felt inherently candidate-centered and more inclusive. So in this presentation, we are going to challenge that hazing mindset that some of us or our colleagues or our institutions still have around interviewing. We assert that when candidates feel a process centers them, they and the search committee can bring their whole self to an interview, which makes for a more inclusive, authentic interview and offers the institution or the library an opportunity to shift their culture. We understand that challenging and changing what we have come to accept as typical interviewing practices can be difficult, especially when we're bound by the constraints of parent institutions. But we are not totally powerless. And that's what we hope you walk away with today, a sense of your own power armed with concrete strategies to influence change. Traditional interviews that we have been a part of have had some inclusive elements, but inclusion was not directly built into the process. And some of the things that we consider typical, either institutionally or societally within the interview process, could have been and probably were harmful to candidates. Then, of course, COVID-19 turned everything on its head, and it changed the way that many of us were working, including the way that we were hiring and interviewing. So as many of us went back to work virtually, so did our interviews. COVID, as a life-changing mass casualty and mass disabling event, woke us up to the ways we and our institutions, through what was considered standard, were perpetuating cultures of white supremacy, ableism, and patriarchy. Not that we weren't aware of all of this before, but it really spotlighted the interview process for us. So through our research, we found virtual interviewing to be a routine practice in many other fields. And thinking back to the keynote yesterday, it's one of those things that are happening outside the library profession that we feel like we could look to, we could adapt, and we could align with the things that we value or the things that we aspire to. So for example, virtual interviews tend to reduce financial and time burdens, reduce anxiety, it provide other social benefits, and offer flexibility to candidates. And we're going to hear a little bit more about those benefits later. Candidates who are Black and Indigenous people of color, neurodivergent, disabled, or LGBTQ have also been shown to greatly benefit from these interviewing changes as well. So armed with experience and with this research, we embrace virtual interviews in order to design a more universally inclusive experience. We found that these practices aligned with our own philosophical leanings, including feminist ethics of care and caring for the whole person. And now Sarah is going to talk to us a little bit more about these underlying theories.
Thank you. So our thinking explicitly has its roots in feminist ethics of care, which was first conceptualized by second wave feminist theorists in the 1980s as a framework of moral philosophy based on care for others within the context of relationships. And as workers, we inherently have relationships with each other. So it's sort of fundamentally person-centered from its genesis. And though caring for and nurturing other people is too often considered reproductive rather than productive labor and therefore undervalued in a capitalist system, we view care for others as a fiduciary duty that we owe to each other regardless of identity. We assert that organizations also have a duty and obligation to support the well-being of candidates as well as current existing employees. And so we propose a shift in organizational culture to care about whole people as a matter of policy and to let that underpin all the choices we make as a result to the extent that we can. Deliberately embracing an ethic of care in an inclusive interviewing process is, of course, not a panacea for all the many ills of patriarchal late-stage capitalism, but it is a step in the right direction. And I am being asked to confirm my speaking language, which is English. Gonna ignore that. Sorry, guys. And so, among other things, caring for a whole person means creating safe, authentic, inclusive environments for a candidate so they can begin to imagine themselves as truly belonging, both in the role and fulfilling the duties of the position, and in the workplace as a person with colleagues. Part of our collective responsibility in the workplace is to address how predominantly white institutions, which many or most higher education institutions tend to automatically reinforce white supremacy, ableism, and racism. Approaching interviewing with an explicit ethic of care can help to mitigate some of those mostly unintentional harms, but they are still harms. Do our default choices create pressure for candidates to expose themselves to potential illness or unnecessary discomfort? Obviously, varying individual comfort levels with travel and indoor dining in the context of COVID became a really glaring example of this, but expectations around breaks and rest and other ways of caring for the body permeate through the whole scheduling process. Remember that interviewing is an inherently embodied practice, and search committees are actively recruiting a whole person with a body, not just the intellectual capacities of a person, to fill an open role. And so care for that whole person, including their body, is important. Next slide, please. Traditional interview processes, as Amanda mentioned at the beginning, often entail a ridiculous gauntlet of commitments, meetings, job talks, social engagements, campus tours, etc. And these tend to skew toward white, middle-class, able-bodied, extroverted people being most successful. And while I, for one, do love the opportunity to gain some energy from talking to new people and imagining myself in a new setting, that can be really exciting and energizing for some people. I acknowledge that that's not universally true, and it doesn't even enable all natural interviews to be truly their most authentic self. It's hard to be genuinely authentic 100% of the time when you are in that state of being on. These are high stakes circumstances, and they don't necessarily need to be. So candidates with visible or invisible disabilities face additional hurdles during these traditional processes, particularly with the unstructured social elements, and it sets people up for social performance. These parts of the interview, along with the marathon nature of the whole thing, are, as we've already discussed, physically, mentally, emotionally grueling, and not necessarily indicative of potential job performance. They may tell you something about likability and how much you click with someone or want to have dinner with them regularly, but it doesn't always have a bearing on their ability to be a successful X, Y, or Z librarian and execute those duties. Instead, these practices reward social skills, likability, conformity, normativity, and further contribute to the homogeneous nature of our field. You see 4 middle-aged white ladies before you, and that tends to be who is often successful in the field. Instead of requiring candidates to either proactively request accommodations or perhaps struggle to cope and adjust to interview norms, we could just move toward designing a more generous process that centers inclusivity and care for each person from the outset, which is, of course, what we think we should all do. And so now let's take a moment to sort of collectively reflect on your experiences on either side of an interview. So maybe you were a candidate and found something that wasn't very thoughtful and wished it were different. Maybe you were on a committee and wished something could have been different, but didn't necessarily feel empowered to change it, or perhaps you did. But let's just collectively share in the chat anything that you might have wanted to see different. I'm sure there's lots of great ideas out there. Yeah, so I'm seeing, yeah, just the emotionalness of if you mess up at lunch, then the rest of the day is already blown. And sort of that feeling of I haven't even made it through the whole interview, but I'm out of the running because I didn't click with so-and-so. Yeah, lots of people are thinking about the introverts. Oh, dress code expectations, too many meetings with administrators. One-on-one lunch would be nice, less pressure. Yeah, lactation breaks being the only breaks. I mean, your body is already doing something amazing and sort of above and beyond. But yeah, additional breaks would be great. So, you're lighting. All right. I think we can move on whenever we feel ready.
Thanks, Sarah. So it seems like we all agree that changes are needed. We all have things that should have been done differently. And one thing that I'm thinking about as I see a lot of these is even sharing expectations with our colleagues who are part of this interview and what we expect them to do. But so completely revamping that interview process, even if you don't move to virtual, may not be possible all at once, right? Whether that's due to internal resistance or due to the workload of those organizing the interview process. And honestly, there will always be things you can change to make your process even more inclusive. Every time you have one of those interviews, right? You learn something that you could be doing differently. So we think that any steps towards more inclusive interviews should be celebrated, even if you can't make all those changes you would like, or you can't make them all at once. We want to share some strategies and ideas that we have either tried or that we have seen in our research for making the interview process more inclusive. While some of these strategies cover the hiring process in general, our focus is really on that final interview stage and on designing an interview that is a positive experience for as many people as possible. We've divided our strategies into 8 sometimes overlapping categories, some concrete and some a bit more philosophical. Amanda, if you could go, thank you. So these first 2 categories are really ones that we need to be particularly thoughtful about for virtual interviews. Accepting responsibility for costs is a widely accepted best practice for in-person interviews, even if it's not always implemented perfectly. But it's important to remember that virtual interviews are not free. And if we're not careful, the burden of costs may be significantly shifted onto candidates. If you're holding a virtual interview for which candidates need more than a phone, consider giving candidates a list of technical requirements well ahead of time with the offer to provide everything needed, including equipment, service, and software. This might be through laptop rentals or by purchasing and sending smaller items such as headphones. Also consider the potential cost of things like space and food that the library would be providing for an in-person interview. Offering to provide all candidates a hotel room with high-speed internet access allows them to simply accept the offer or turn it down, rather than struggling with the decision to disclose or not personal circumstances that may make a virtual interview in their home very difficult. Since you won't be taking candidates out for meals, if it's a virtual interview, consider sending them food delivery gift cards redeemable in the candidate's local area, allowing them to focus on the interview. This all might sound expensive, but it is unlikely to be any more expensive than flying a candidate out for an interview, and in most cases, less expensive. Candidates will accept these offers if they are needed, and they know better than you if they are needed, right? They shouldn't need to justify accepting any of these offers. We should be offering them freely. For some of these costs, you may be constrained by institutional policies regarding how money can be spent, but even asking can help change thinking at the institutional level over time. Virtual interviews in particular require more use and comfort with technology. It's important not to assume your candidates know how to use all the software and technology they'll need for a virtual interview. I was thinking last week about the extremely detailed information, training, and in-presentation support provided to presenters for this conference, and how little is often provided to interview candidates in comparison, even though the stakes are much higher when you're interviewing for a job. And to be clear, I'm very thankful for all of that support. It just really highlighted to me how we should be doing such a good job on the interview side as well. Provide candidates with a guide to the software you'll be using in the interview, provide them with a chance to practice, provide technical support during the interview in case there are issues on your end or theirs, and practice empathy. A lack of opportunity or experience doesn't equal an inability to learn, and unexpected technical issues happen to all of us. Speaking of practicing empathy, apply that in the how and what you communicate with candidates. Don't assume candidates are knowledgeable about the academic hiring process, and even if they are, there may be significant differences on your campus. Holding a Zoom information session during the recruitment period allows the committee to talk to many candidates at once and really explain the local process as well as what the committee is looking for in candidates. It's also a way to market your library, institution, and city to potential candidates. Once you move into the interview phase, communication with selected candidates should be regular and ongoing. Having more information can help mitigate the anxiety and uncertainty that comes with the interview process, even for experienced candidates. How to communicate with candidates, either by phone or email, is often left up to the search committee chair or hiring manager, and we all have different preferences. For candidates who you invite for screening or final interviews, consider asking them ahead of time how they would like to receive either good or bad news. Being rejected is so hard. The most empathetic way to deliver that news is in the way the candidate prefers, not in the way you prefer. Strategies for creating a more inclusive interview schedule really start with communication, even though we've given it its own category. And we've already seen some really great suggestions and things that we're not mentioning today, but are so true in the chat, like making it shorter, giving real breaks. But we really believe that the candidate should be a partner in creating the schedule, not simply a recipient. Ask candidates lots of questions about their preferences. Is there a time of day they cannot start before and after which they cannot continue? Do they prefer frequent short breaks or longer breaks more infrequently, or a mixture of both? What time zone will they be in on the day of the interview? If the interview is in person, there should also be questions about dietary and drink preferences. If they prefer to eat alone or in a group, if they have a preference for outdoors or indoor dining, if they are interested in a tour of campus, would they prefer to walk or have a driving or golf cart tour, etc. While it may seem overwhelming to ask candidates so many questions ahead of time, giving them as many options as possible means they are less likely to need to request accommodations or to feel like the burden being placed on them needs to be high enough to make such a request. This gives candidates more agency and ever so slightly shifts that balance of power away from the interviewers. Offering many options can lead to different interview schedules, but the goal is not equality or conformity, but to provide equity in the process and create an environment where each candidate is able to do their best. For virtual interviews, also consider the effects of Zoom fatigue on your candidates. Normalize and encourage cameras off until it is time to start a session, and consider sitting further back from your camera so the effect is more like sitting across the table rather than being up in their personal space. Amanda, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. For interview questions, ask all candidates the same prepared questions and provide questions to candidates a week or more in advance. This practice can lessen candidate anxiety, reduce structural bias, and provide a more equitable process, particularly for neurodiverse candidates. Most academic library positions do not require making big decisions under pressure or even in isolation. When candidates have time to consider questions, we get more thoughtful answers, a more conversational interview, and arguably a better indicator of how they will perform in the position. In addition to the prepared questions you share with candidates, consider writing potential follow-up questions in case more information is needed. These need not end up being identical for each candidate, but having them prepared will help reduce potential bias and keep questions from straying too far into the personal while still getting the information you need to make a decision. Well before the interviews, think about ways to demonstrate how candidates' intersecting identities will be home in your library. This will almost surely be different for different libraries and dependent on the interview modality. This might include sharing library DEIA statements that include accessibility information about the library, the demographic makeup of the employees, and how DEIA is centered in library policies, procedures, and work cultures. Creating such statements may be out of your control, but you can still provide candidates with information about library and campus DEIA initiatives, employee affinity groups, etc. Sharing videos of physical spaces and current employees describing their work, what they like about the organization, and answering common questions can give candidates an idea of how their intersecting identities will be at home in your library. Particularly for virtual interviews, this will provide information that otherwise they may not be able to glean. There are also more personal ways we can show candidates we respect their identities and those of their colleagues. Ahead of the interview, offer candidates an opportunity to send pronouns, the name they would like to use, and an audio recording of how to pronounce their name. A service like Name Coach is an easy way to offer this, especially since anyone can create a name badge with them for free, which includes pronouns and audio name pronunciation. Consider providing this same information along with position and contact information for everyone the candidates will be meeting during their interview. Ensure that candidates have time during their interview, if they wish, for informal meetings where they can ask questions without influencing decision-making. Ideally, these sessions should be offered solely for the candidate's benefit and separate from any evaluative parts of the interview. Next slide, please. Thanks. In our research, we found that the most commonly reported disadvantages of virtual interviews are an inability to gain a good understanding of the physical workplace environment, the culture, and the city an institution is located in. If you're holding virtual interviews for a position that will be in person or hybrid, offer your final candidate an optional, all expenses paid visit to campus following a formal offer with salary. An on-campus visit allows candidates to see spaces in which they might work, the people with whom they will work, and to get a better idea of how the organization lives its stated values. This visit may impact the candidate's assessment of whether or not the institution is aligned with their personal values and goals. So the visit should not be contingent upon them accepting the position. One possible institutional concern is that a candidate may accept this trip offer with no intention of taking the position. Those with this concern should reflect on the patriarchal thinking that if the library spends money on a candidate, the library is owed something in return. Finding the right candidate, one who is right for the institution and for whom the institution is right, is an investment of time and money that will pay off in the long run. Trust that candidates have no wish to waste their own time or yours, and also understand that an in-person visit may reveal things about the institution or place that make them no longer interested. Whether candidates are successful or not, they are our professional colleagues and deserve the same flexibility and grace we provide to everyone in our lives. This is not so much a strategy as a way of being throughout the whole interview process. Search committee chairs or hiring managers are in a position to infuse a feminist ethic of care into the interview process and remind everyone involved to recognize and set aside biases and any capitalist expectations that the organization comes before the individual. In those positions, we can frame and influence the way in which our colleagues receive news about rescheduling needs, technical difficulties, and even candidate requests that differ from those that are considered typical interview processes. advising everyone involved in the interview that they should not take any of these issues or requests into consideration when evaluating the candidate, and emphasizing the need for understanding and flexibility can be impactful and even sow seeds of change in your organization if you're not already seeing those things for the people who work there. So that is just a few ideas, and I'm going to hand it off now to Jamie to lead us in some reflection.
Thank you, Rebecca. So what we'd like to do now is invite you to take 5 minutes to reflect on ways that you and your institution can embed empathy and care into your interview practices and add your ideas to our Padlet, which was just shared in the chat. There's also a QR code for it on our slide. Please, we'd like to encourage you to be creative and aspirational. What might seem crazy at your institution might just work at someone else's. So be creative. And we will check in on all of your thoughts in about 5 minutes.
I'm looking at these chats and thinking you all should have been presenting with us. There's so many good ideas and so many things I agree with. I know there are more things that are worthy of me commenting on, so I'm sorry that I'm only seeing a few. I can't get to all of them. Oh, yes. Let's put the Padlet in the chat. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you, Alyssa. And Amanda, do you want to switch over to the Padlet? It looks like there's all kinds of good things going in. I'm looking at the burden of cost, and yes, yes, yes. Like they shouldn't be paying for anything upfront. This comment about don't leave them hanging, especially if they're candidate number 2, I think is really great. And really, I think for all of the candidates, I don't know how it works where all of you are, but like even for those candidates that you know, you don't interview at all, you can let them know they're not in the running early on. There, Jamie, it looked like you were about to say something.
No, that's okay.
I just saw this post-interview questions if using Zoom. And now I'm forgetting who wrote this article, but there was just an article in CNRL News that had that as a strategy for something to do if you're in Zoom, to post those questions so people can see them. Oh, that sounds terrible. The HR said they were contacting the candidates but never did. That's
The
no good.
unintentional ghosting. There's
Yeah.
almost nothing worse. A phone call with bad news might actually be worse, but ghosting is pretty bad.
Well, some people might prefer phone calls, so that's why it's
Maybe.
good to ask.
Maybe.
Thank you to whoever put the cultural calendar for religious holidays for scheduling. That is something that we have talked about, and I can't believe we forgot to include it. I feel like we could have talked about stuff to do for so long, but yeah.
Jessica, you've been done dirty, girlfriend.
Oh no.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Granola bars in the bathroom. Twitter
Aw.
post. Terrible. What not to do.
I noticed someone in the communication with candidates column mentioned that it would be helpful to send life information to the candidates, like things to do, schools, utilities, play, leisure, spiritual life, etc. I know one thing Rebecca has done recently is to create a LibGuide with that kind of information for candidates. But I think this has more information that would be helpful to include. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that I've been trying to get people to do is write descriptions of their neighborhoods that include what they like about living there with all of that. And but I think having even more of this information would be great. The under the technical skills and support, the suggestion about having the initial round be a telephone or phone interview, I think is great. I know on the end of the interviewers, I feel like Zoom is a lot easier, but it's so easy to make it just a call, right? So that candidates can just call in with the phone. And then, I mean, it's a little bit easier to assume, right, that people have access to a phone than any other kind of equipment.
I also really appreciate under flexibility and grace, the first post that someone said just to assume good intentions. I think that can go such a long way in interview processes, but also just in working with your colleagues. You know, mix-ups happen. People can, you know, read dates wrong or times wrong, and it's not an indicator of how they'll be as an employee. So just giving people that grace is just so important.
Agreed. And the same with the rescheduling a little further down. If the candidate cancels offer to reschedule, I feel like that shouldn't even be a question, right? Like if they're still interested, why would it change for us that they need to reschedule? Things happen when you're employed somewhere, right? Like you have life happens and sometimes you need to reschedule.
Do you think we should move on?
I think we're ready.
All right, well, thank you so much for participating in this activity. You've given us and your fellow attendees a lot of great ideas to work with. So if you're interested in keeping these ideas, you might want to bookmark the Padlet. I'm not sure if that will be shared everywhere. And Amanda, would you please go ahead and bring up that slide? All right, so in conclusion, it's important to acknowledge that it will take time and persistence to build empathy and care into academic library recruitment practices and make them more person-centered. One might not be able to implement every desired change, but gradual progress in this direction must be prioritized and celebrated. Prioritizing inclusive and accessible interviewing means rejecting capitalist notions of profit above all else, and instead creating an environment in which people are valued more. We know it can be difficult for those of us in academic libraries to imagine alternatives to processes that have served us well and our organizations well in the past. However, these processes haven't served everyone equally. So some may argue that because they endured a grueling in-person multi-day interview process, that those who succeed them should too. We have to reject that kind of hazing mindset, because that's really what that is, that's hazing, and provide our future colleagues with better experiences than our own. And we can do that by embedding feminist principles of empathy and care into all of our practices. Okay, Amanda, next slide. I think we're ready for questions and answers.
Would you all like me to
Yeah,
summarize some of the Q&A?
we've already got some. You guys have really got your
So there were a couple on sort of a similar theme about, how to avoid giving preferential treatment or, unintentionally sort of, judging or retaliating against folks who do request more accommodations. Do you all have any strategies there?
So at least one of the questions seem to kind of, well, one thing that we have really talked about is that it shouldn't be a choice between virtual or in person, that it really should be, we really think they should be virtual, but we understand that that is not how it is at most institutions. And so it should either be all one or the other. If your institution feels like you must have in-person interviews, then they should all be in person, but kind of how that interview is structured could be different. Someone else want to say anything about that?
It might be worth noting that many library adjacent corporations do entirely virtual interviews. So it is working for businesses and those for whom profit is very important. Which doesn't make it right, but it's a consideration.
In this case, it works.
It's a consideration. Yeah.
And in our research, we found that the medical field was really doing this, particularly for interviewing intern candidates, and resident candidates. So that is also kind of another group that is doing this and doing this well and doing this successfully. And I think having a conversation with the search and with your colleagues about, okay, this candidate chose these specific accommodations and this one didn't. That doesn't mean one is better than the other, or one will perform better than the other in the job. It just means that they needed a little extra support, and we are going to give that to any colleague, whether they work here or not. So I think just having that conversation and being really explicit about that with your colleagues and trying to shift the culture that way, I think is also important. What other questions?
Absolutely, Lindy, that about having the opportunity to visit, I feel like that's really important, and the library should be paying for that.
So a couple others that were on a similar theme were about sort of getting buy-in from other employees and, in particular, a varying, group of people who end up chairing search committees. Our biggest obstacle is that our faculty are disengaged in the process, and it can be hard to pitch person-centered search practices that are more time-intensive.
And I think the time-intensive piece is difficult. I know one thing that has helped me is having published articles to share with my colleagues about why we should be doing things. And I think that was certainly part of our thought process, both in writing this chapter and in doing this presentation, because it feels like so many of our colleagues, they're able to listen to things better if they're hearing it kind of from an outside voice that someone has deemed worthy of listening to, right? As opposed to just what we think and have felt.
And I think for me, I have been successful in convincing folks just by explaining the why, like Rebecca said, having the literature or having a conversation about what kind of culture do we want to have. So I'm a library manager, and so I do a lot around culture in my work at the library. So I really try to have those conversations anyway. So this is just another way for us to integrate this into the things that we're already doing. And I also think something that I was thinking about as Rebecca was talking was we might feel like, oh my God, I have to do all of these things at once right now for this search, and you don't have to. I think if you can kind of pick what works and pick what works for you, and that I think slowly over time, you can start implementing some of these things. You don't have to like go all in right away.
Yeah. I've seen some notes in the Q&A and in the chat panel about how this varies by committee chair, and it certainly does. It's probably a lot of extra work for the committee chair, or at least some extra work, to be really deliberate in how they are messaging to committee members, to be really comprehensive in how they are providing options to candidates. Here are all the things we are willing to be flexible on. It's thoughtful, and it's time consuming, and it's extra labor, reproductive labor, but caring labor, probably for the search committee chair. So I think we should choose our committee chairs wisely, maybe embed it into some committee training, perhaps in places where that's possible. But yeah, they're in constant refinement. We'll keep getting better. There are things that we haven't thought of today that'll seem obvious tomorrow. But yeah, just starting with the value part and then letting the rest trickle down.
And just to go off of that, Sarah, like from being in the position of a committee chair who really tried to put in a lot of that work, I think documenting what you do and documenting what questions you ask and your emails and like sharing those afterwards can really help other people to reproduce some of that work without having to start all the way from the beginning. And I think ideally, like your institution wants to document that and have that available. But even if that's not happening at an institutional level, like on a personal level, sharing that information.
Yep. Yeah, I just wrapped up 2 searches, one for a full-time position, one for a part-time position, and I approached them differently, and there was no documentation because I've been in my job for 3 months. And I did like a post-mortem with myself, like, okay, what should I have done differently here? What should I have done differently here? And then tried to make some of that documentation that I would have for future reference, because I know I'm going to be hiring again soon. So take care of your future self.
Right. Also a person worthy of care. Don't reinvent the wheel every time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another theme that's come up in a couple questions in the Q&A is around, whether or not virtual interviews are as successful. So one, just generally about the impact of how different interview formats impact retention and job satisfaction, and one specifically reflecting on some difficulties from fully virtual interviews during the pandemic, that led to hiring fails. Do you all have any thoughts or information about that?
It's an area for future research. Sounds like
And-
someone has a research project.
I would also be interested to hear more about what was the cause of the fail, like if that was obvious, because then, and I think like during the pandemic, it was hard to integrate anything other than virtual, right? Offering that for someone to come to campus was not as possible. Whereas now I think offering that trip to campus for that final candidate, that might help with some of the things that they would miss in a virtual interview, things that are only obvious when they're there in person.
I also would
Yeah.
be curious to know whether or not the cause of the bad hire or the failures in hiring were really because of virtual interviewing, or were they because of what was happening in the world at that time and the impacts on people's personal lives, their work lives, etc. So it could be that that wasn't the cause, maybe. But I know institutions are some institutions are doing just virtual interviews, like my own is now, and it's working out well. So
Yeah. Yeah. And same, I work for a scholarly publisher. All our jobs are virtual. All our interviews are virtual. And by and large, that's enormously successful.
So another question from the Q&A. Do you have recommendations for offering feedback to candidates who didn't get the job if they ask?
Yeah.
I think that's always difficult. But I also think like that's a good reason to make sure that you are basing your evaluation of the candidates on what you have in the job description, what you are actually looking for in a candidate, and not on any kind of fuzzy fit things, right? That don't really mean anything, or they mean things that are not good. Anybody else?
And one other question, we're hearing a lot about setting aside biases, but what are suggestions for like how to actually do that?
Yeah. I think for me, thinking about, especially working at a predominantly white institution, being a white woman, I've had to do a lot of my own personal work around dismantling biases, a lot of readings and workshops, and really being more cognizant of those things. So thinking about specific reading that you can do, How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, White Women, Everything You Need to Know About Race by Regina Jackson and Syra Rao. Doing some of those things, I think help, but also taking accountability for when you do get it wrong, because we all get it wrong. And again, like Rebecca was saying, avoiding the fit, having that conversation about fit and why hiring for fit is not a good thing.
And I
What
think calling out your colleagues when they're making assumptions or comments, that they should not be making, right? Because not everyone is going to do that work. So even if you are doing that work, part of the work that you need to be doing, I think, especially for those of us who are white women or who do not have, who are able-bodied, who don't have, who I think we need to be able to point out to our colleagues when they shouldn't be making certain assumptions and what biases they're bringing to the table.
And maybe, making that a part of the search committee process, having some sort of structured activity where you guys go through that, before you even start looking at applications. Might be a good idea. Yes, Sojourner, be prepared to be the people who speak up and don't rely on our BIPOC colleagues to do that. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's part of being an ally. You have to say hard things sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, moral courage. It's like the bare minimum, right? Yeah.
I would like to address this question about the breaks. Because I think having longer breaks or shorter breaks doesn't necessarily mean that candidates have less or more face time. It means that you arrange the schedule differently, right? That, instead of having 30 minutes in between sessions, you only have 10 minutes in between sessions, and like just the day is arranged differently. It doesn't have to mean that there's more or less face time. And if there are things that mean more or less face time, like a candidate chooses to eat alone, those meals shouldn't be part of the evaluative process anyway. Those should be for the candidate if they wish to talk to future colleagues and ask questions about the library, then that's great. But that shouldn't have anything to do with how they're evaluated or whether or not they're hired. So I think the only difference in face time should really be that kind of piece, where not the evaluative piece of the face time.
Yeah, and it's the responsibility of the search committee chair to make that really explicit, that
Exactly.
so and so you're taking this candidate out to dinner, but think of it as social, not as anything beyond that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, employment gaps, none of your business. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. And it might even not be an employment gap, but one that they don't wish to put on their resume for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Yes, people not on the search committee, the meals. Yes, I am saying that everyone should get the same amount of face time regardless of breaks, at least for the evaluative piece of things.
We've got a few more minutes. There's one new question in the Q&A. Do you have tips for communicating with alternate candidates after interviews if you are waiting for your primary candidate to visit campus to help make their decision? I find that to be one of the most uncomfortable times in the candidate experience, and sometimes timelines can be lengthy.
That's a great question. I do think if you have decided after an interview that you would not offer a candidate the position, no matter what the other candidate says, you should let them know as soon as possible, which doesn't really address this question. But I mean, I think ideally we should at least be telling them, like, we're still in the process of making our decision, right? Because we are, especially if there's someone that we might want to offer that position to, we're still in the process of making the decision, but letting them know, like, we're still in the process.
And I've had times, sorry,
go ahead.
No, I was just saying I've had times where I've had to I've emailed the candidates and saying, I apologize, the search is taking a little bit longer than expected. And then if it's taking, more than a week or more than 2 weeks, I follow up again. Again, apologies, we're just, we're having some issues, something like that, just to let them know that, like, we're still in process.
And I think it's a good idea to kind of give a long timeline at the end of the interview, right? If you know at the end of that final interview that you're going to hopefully be making your decision in a week, but then you're going to offer an in-person trip, like tell everyone that we don't expect any information for 3 weeks or something that aligns with that.
Are we ready to wrap up? Okay.
Well, thank you so much for attending our presentation and sharing all of your ideas. If this is a topic that interests you, we invite you to check out our book chapter, which will hopefully be coming out sometime in 2024. And feel free to reach out if you'd like to work together on this.
Yeah, thank you again to Amanda, Rebecca, Jamie, and Sarah for answering all the questions, for the great presentation. It was a pleasure to have you all with us. Before we close the session, I just want to remind you all that the evaluation survey will be available for you to complete. It should pop up when you exit out of the session. I'm certain the presenters would very much appreciate your feedback. And you can find a link to that either in SCED or as a pop-up. Thank you all for attending. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. We'll see you soon.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, all.
And yes, slides will be shared. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye.